to the extent that for you, you've known me during this period where I've worked out this notion that the Exodus is historical, but a much smaller Exodus involving only the Levites, and that they merged their God Yahweh with the God of the Israelites who were back in Israel, the chief god of that region, chief god of Canaanites and Ugarites as well, El, and that their notion of merging Yahweh and El, instead of saying, well, we'll worship this one, or we'll worship that one, or we'll worship both, suggests to me a monotheistic impulse very, very early, earlier than almost any of my colleagues in the field think. And so it was, you're at that particular point of development in my thinking, and that I've said, I wrote a piece recently that the tremendous concern about the alien and being kind to the alien reflects that it's mentioned 52 times in the Torah that aliens have to be treated the same as citizens, and that you have to love your neighbor as yourself, and it doesn't mean only your fellow Israelite, it means everybody, and that if you see your enemy's ox fall, you're supposed to help him get it up, and if you see your enemy, you defeat them in battle, you're not allowed to rape their women, and all these, this whole notion of others, and of being concerned with the whole world, with when telling their national story, they start with creation of the whole world, not just with themselves, not just with Israel. I mean, the Bible could have easily have begun with Exodus, or begun with Joshua, or begun with Judges, and it would have made perfect sense. If someone told you, write a history of the United States of America, it's unlikely that you would go, well, first there was the Big Bang, and then there was the breaking of cosmic symmetry during the part of the first second after the Big Bang. And then you wouldn't do that. You'd sort of get to the US pretty quickly. You might start with Columbus or Scandinavians who probably came here before Columbus, or if you were a real thoughtful person, you might even start with Native Americans who got here like thousands of years before Columbus. And he arrived and said, I've discovered you. And they said, no, we discovered you. We walked down to the shore and there you were. I said, but it's okay because today's a holiday, Columbus Day. So that's why we're not working today. So that is to say that there was this tremendous concern with kindness to others, with treating others the same. In other words, an ethical concern. And so it is possible that a historical exodus actually was the kernel that gave birth to monotheism and gave birth to this ethical treatment of outsiders. Other religions before that had ethical treatment. You can look at the Code of Hammurabi that's like 1,000 years older than some of the Bible law codes. And it's not an evil law code. It's a very good law code in most ways. It does things that you'd approve of, a few you would not approve of. And it's also looking to establish equity and fairness and all that too. So it's not that the Bible invented that. It's not the way some of us learned in Sunday school, like the whole world was evil until the Bible came along. I mean, it's not true. But that it did bring this tremendous new ethical component that you do not find in other ancient law codes and all, which is this equal, fair, kind, ethical treatment of outsiders. And so it's a funny thing because since I was a kid, I did not like the term ethical monotheism. And that's what they often teach you in intro religion courses. They say that Judaism and then presumably Christianity and Islam involve, and Baha'i involve ethical monotheism. And I always thought, well, that's a very misleading term. It makes it sound like people who aren't monotheists are unethical. And I'm going, pagans weren't unethical. They weren't all just running around knifing each other until Moses came along. So I didn't like the term. But now at least I'm a little more comfortable with the idea that it was a common historical set of circumstances that both gave birth to monotheism and gave birth to this tremendous ethical aspect. And so that at least for Israelite monotheism, which is the first lasting monotheism, the two went together. And so as it developed in later rabbinic Judaism and in Christianity and in Islam and in Baha'i, that there's this idea that goes together with monotheism, apparently, that You're not supposed to be bad, you're supposed to be good, imagine. And that's tremendous, and it's something to take away from the course. Now, since in our first course here we're only treating all the narrative books of the Bible, we're not treating the prophets, I thought I should at least mention them. They are 15 books of the prophets. For some people it's their favorite books, for some not. They are less story and more something else going on. So I just want to give us today a single essence of the prophets. And for those of you who go on and take a course on the prophets, great. And if not, at least you'll have gotten the core, of the prophets. Prophets, as I understand them, are witnesses. The narrative books we read are historians telling what happened. And we can have all the usual arguments over the accuracy of what they tell. Is there a different level of history writing in the Adam and Eve story from the story of one of the kings, or Ezra and Nehemiah? Are they made up tales? Are they really based on history? Did the people who were writing them think they were writing what happened, or did they think they were inventing? We can have all those usual arguments, but as the text stands, it is a record. All those books that we read in this course. Now, the prophets are different. They are not writing a record of their times. They're not trying to write history. There's all different kinds of genres of literature in the books of the prophets, but overall, it's fair to say that they are witnesses stepping out and talking themselves out of the story. So if you wrote some history of the United States now, and it's years later, and you write a whole history about the different presidents and the Senate and the elections and the social issues of our time and the religious issues and all that, and it's let's say it's 50, 60, 70 years now, and you find some old guy, and you say, what was that like? And he tells you his own experience of it all. Right? He's providing you with historical information, and to some extent it figures in history. And if he tells it beautifully, he's providing you with literature. But the point is, he saw it and he's talking about it. It's like interviewing witnesses. It's like now, Steven Spielberg, the filmmaker, is doing this thing. He's interviewing, getting on camera interviews with every Holocaust survivor who will talk about it. Because in another few years, there'll be nobody left alive who lived through that. So they're getting this extraordinary record, and they're making it available to, like, all university libraries will be able to have this. So you could go in and listen to hundreds or thousands of people who lived it and can talk about it. Now that'll have a completely different content from taking a course on the Holocaust and reading, books that people wrote about it, or seeing a movie about it, or, this will be different. So that's the prophets. They're witnesses. They give you like a whole different level of what happened. They complement the history. To a large extent, they're in first person. Often there's a notation at the beginning that's in third person, like the opening of the book of Isaiah, which is the first book of the prophets, says the vision of Isaiah. So that's somebody saying this is the vision of Isaiah. But then for a lot of it, it's the words that Isaiah himself speaks. So there's much more first person than there was in the book of Kings. The other interesting thing is when you read narrative, it was disproportionately in prose. When you read the prophets, it's disproportionately in poetry. Now, why would that be? The prophecies in poetry, histories in prose. You might say, well, that's just obvious. I mean, you don't pick up a history book and it's written in poetry. That would be really strange. I did have an argument with a classical scholar once who she insisted that Homer was history, that the Iliad and the Odyssey were history in the same sense that the books of Samuel and Kings are history. And I didn't agree, and we argued, and you can take whatever position you want on that, but you just normally don't think of epic poetry as history, even though, there really was a war against Troy by the Greeks. That is historical. It may not have happened quite the way it is in the book, in the story, but something happened. And so it contains history, but most people would not define the Iliad or the Odyssey or any other epic poem as history. Nobody defines Beowulf as history because nobody reads it. But if even when assigned, we just can't read that thing. So one of my medievalist colleagues is going to kill me for that one. But the prophets speak in poetry, and it's beautiful poetry. And why would that be? My teacher, Frank Cross, had the notion that it is only the poet who can step out of time. It's only a prophet, a person who occasionally even predicts the future. It is poets who do that, not historians. Historians and other social scientists, economists, sociologists, psychologists, anthropologists, in general, are best at describing what is, either what's out there to be seen now or what has happened. But a certain colleague of mine has referred to the complete failure of the social sciences ever to predict anything. And often people win the Nobel Prize in economics, and then everybody wants to ask them, what stock to buy and stuff like that, and they don't know. And you ask them which way the economy is likely to go, and they go, well, there's going to be a correction within 3 years. And they don't know. And yet, that's not a criticism of them. They can be really brilliant at helping you understand what has happened. But prediction is not the realm of the kind of mind that does social sciences, and above all, the social science known as history. They are a different kind of mind. That's prophets. Poets can do that. How does a poet step out of time in a way that a historian can't, so that they can make a jump? Not for philosophy does this rose give a damn, but while you and I have lips and voices which are for kissing and to sing with, who cares if some one-eyed son of a bitch invents an instrument to measure spring with? Why then, to hell with that, the other, this, since the thing perhaps is to eat flowers and not to be afraid. Anybody here picture a historian writing that? Anybody know who that was? Anybody? E.E. Cummings, one of our best American poets. And you don't hear that poem and say, in what year did that rose not give a damn about philosophy? A poet, it's a separate kind of mind. It's a mind I admit I don't have. I have a mind of a historian, and even though a literary scholar and all that, I don't have the gift for poetry. The only poems I ever wrote were stupid, and I'm not going to quote them to you. And, it's a long time ago. But here are these prophets, the biblical prophets, where there are things in Isaiah who a lot of people would say has the best, that are just stunning. I could give you all a speech and try to inspire you to look forward to a day when people won't have wars anymore. But Isaiah could say, they'll beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. A nation won't lift a sword against a nation, and they won't learn war anymore. Don't you wish you'd thought of that? And the interesting thing, by the way, is the prophet Micah, who lived at the same time as the prophet Isaiah, which is around the time of King Hezekiah, 8th century. The prophet Micah, if you look in the book of Micah, he says, they'll beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. A nation won't lift a sword against a nation, and they won't learn war anymore. And you go, whoa, prophetic plagiarism? What is this? I'll talk in a minute how that could be that they would both use the same line. The really interesting thing is the prophet Joel, who says, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears, and he flips it, which is really interesting, you know. So you create something beautiful and you give a message in a different kind of way that inspires different kind of people. So both are covered, you know. And poetry is different. And when you ask people, here's an assignment. When you leave here, go ask somebody you know, which did humans write first, prose or poetry? I don't know. I'm guessing most people will guess prose. I might be wrong. They're wrong. Humans wrote poetry for thousands of years before we wrote prose. The Gilgamesh epic is over 1,000 years older than any of the prose that we've read in this course. Once I was at a dinner party in Jerusalem, and the woman sitting next to me was a poet, so I said, why do you think that is? That humans wrote poetry for like 1,000, 2,000 years before we wrote prose. And she goes, what? I'm going, oh, that's a dirty trick. That's a poet's answer to the question. You know? So she could have been saying heartbeat. We naturally have a rhythm inside of us. Or she could have been saying it's an essential human thing. It's in our spirit. Or she could have been saying, leave me alone. You're giving me heartburn. I don't know what she meant. And that's the point. It's poetry. She left me to have to interpret her answer. But poetry was our mode first. And so I've told you many times now, the oldest things in the Bible, right, are the Song of Miriam, the Song of Deborah, the Blessing of Jacob, the Blessing of Moses, and Psalm 18. Those are the 5 oldest things in the Bible. All poetry or songs, not prose. Yeah.
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
Song of Miriam, also known as the Song of the Sea, that's Exodus 15. The Song of Deborah, that's Judges 5. The Blessing of Jacob, where he's on his deathbed and he gives a blessing to all his sons, that's Genesis 49. The Blessing of Moses before he dies, where he blesses each of the tribes, that's Deuteronomy 33, and Psalm 18, are probably the 5 oldest things in the Bible. 12th, 11th, 10th at the latest century. And so even biblically, we were writing poetry before we were writing prose. And that's remarkable. And that's what the prophets do, because they unlock time and can look in the future. And I take prophecy very seriously. I know people who are good at prophesying the future, and I know some who aren't. I know one guy who said he has a PhD in futurism. You know, you can do IBU of Wisconsin. There are a couple of places that have programs who do a PhD in futuristic studies. And what their approach is, when you try to predict the future about anything, political, military, religious, whatever, social, most human prediction, the odds of getting it right are, I don't know, it's not exactly 50-50, but it's somewhere in there when you predict. Tails, you know, I mean, it's. So their goal is to learn more about how things happen and roll out in time so that they can get up to like a 70% rate of successful prediction. And every now and then he's done a couple of good ones, and I don't know, but about less than 10 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, he said, you know what the next major war the Americans will fight, you know who it'll be against? No. Russia, he said. I go, Russia? What are you talking about? Russia's practically a third world country now. They couldn't. Well, that doesn't look so dumb now, does it? And he was on that a lot of years ago. So I don't know. And he's not poetic at all. So I'm being very, very cautious. He's a social scientist, mostly economics. So I'm cautious, but the prophets sometimes did that. When you read that the prophet Jeremiah predicts that the Babylonians will successfully defeat the Jews and will destroy Jerusalem and even the temple, and that Jews will go into exile. Now, that all happened. Now, what's your approach to that? You can say, no, that just means that the book of Jeremiah was written later, and they checked out what happened, and then they wrote, say, Jeremiah predicting it. Now, a lot of people do that. That's called prophecy ex eventu. Okay. See, if it's Latin, it sounds more intellectual. Right, where you get it out of the event. The event already happened, and then you say, oh yeah, I said that. I knew that was going to happen. I am so not going to make a football analogy right now. So, but then again, to tell you the truth, when I read Jeremiah, it does not sound to me, and I admit now I'm talking about a sense of a text, not a proof. I'm not giving you evidence. It does not sound to me like something that was written up later to make it work out. Some people have that kind of insight that they can predict the future. Once I gave a course on prophecy, and at the end of the course, this was 30-something years ago, I made like 5 predictions. And I said, well, we'll all check back with each other in a few decades to see how I can't even remember what most of the ones were that I made. I remember one of them was that Barbra Streisand would make a rock record, which she did. She sang together with Donna Summer, and they made a disco thing. So I got that one right. I suppose you want something more meaningful than that. I said then, I predicted that the main event of the 21st century, okay, now I was saying this in the late 1970s. I predicted that the main event of the 21st century would be the final showdown, the resolution, whichever way it was going to go, between the West, by which I meant the Christian world, and the communist world. It was Marxism versus Christianity, I thought was going to be the major event of the 21st century. Well, I got that wrong. If anything, the major event of the 21st century is going to be the showdown, the resolution between the Muslim world and the Christian world. Whereas Marxism, unless it has a rebirth and has, another round and a stronger version of it, which seems, unlikely to me, and as you know, I'm a great prophet, so I know. But at the present moment, it certainly looks like it's that. And when I use the word the Christian world, I'm including Jews and atheists. I mean the Western world, which at its core, in its values, is Christian. And yet there's this new challenge to it in a whole new way. I could be wrong. I was wrong in the late 70s. I see no reason why any of you should think I could be right now, except that we're closer. I mean, we're now in the 21st century, so we're closer to wherever this is going. But there are some people who are good at it and can do it. I mean, I got Barbra Streisand right. Jeremiah got the destruction of Jerusalem right. Okay, so some people are better at it than others. But I think he did it. Now, my great colleague David Noel Friedman You notice I've quoted Frank Moorcross and David Noel Friedman a lot through this course, and I am doing so today as well. They were the two greats of the past century, I believe. Cross was my teacher. David Noel Friedman was my senior colleague. First he was at the U of Michigan, then his last 20 years he was at UC San Diego. They were both trained under the great Albright at Johns Hopkins, which is where all the great scholars of the 1940s and 50s in America came from. And they did extraordinary things. Cross produced over 100 students in addition to a lot of extraordinarily significant scholarship. 100 who almost everyone got a tenure-track job and is a professor somewhere now. And Noel Friedman told Cross, every time you put out a student, I put out a book. But it was actually much more. He put out hundreds of books, including the Anchor Bible, which has sold 3 million copies in hardbound of commentary on the Bible, and that's just one of his projects. I mean, these two extraordinary men, you know, I cite them therefore. And it was Noel who said something that I was going to tell you now. Well, that's going to have to come back to me. But it was really important. And it will come back. What was I talking about? Predicting the future. Oh, yes. Got it. Tyler is my, you know, we could work up a routine. You know. He noted the cases in the Bible where prophets got things wrong, where they made predictions that didn't come true. And he said that those were significant and that it was important that there be some prophecies in the Bible that didn't come true, because that meant you could take it seriously when they gave the ones that did come true. It means that the editors of the Bible aren't cheating and making it all prophecies ex eventu, but that they were honestly recording the prophecies that people made. And if they got them right or if they got them wrong, it didn't matter. They recorded them. Now, some people are still suspicious, and they say, no, it could be that for every prophecy that Ezekiel got right, there was a guy living across the street from Ezekiel, another prophet who said 50 other things. Those didn't come true. So his book we didn't save, and Ezekiel's book we did save. But I think that's unlikely. First of all, because I don't think there could be that many great writers in ancient Israel. I mean, there's a lot already. It's too much, for such a period of time. And to picture that there were a bunch of others that were just as good, but their prophecies didn't come true, so they didn't make it into the book. I don't think so. And further, the proof of that is we did include in the Bible, I mean, the people who set the canon of the Bible, they did include the ones where some of the prophecies didn't come true. And then, some people, if you're a religious Christian or Jew and you don't like that idea, so the ones that didn't come true, you go, well, no, maybe it just didn't come true yet, or it didn't, and you do what you can, or it came true but not the way you think, or it had you do what you can to live with it. But I think even from a very religious, reverent point of view, you can accept that some of the prophecies of the Bible didn't come true, and you know that the purpose of that is to keep the book honest. So, what's next? When was prophecy born in the Bible? According to the Bible's own report, it's in the book of Exodus, when the people are at Sinai, and they all hear God talk directly to them. So it's not mediated by a prophet. It's God talking directly to the mass of the people, to the nation. And the people are terrified by this, and they say to Moses, you speak with God and tell us what he said, and we'll listen, but let God not speak with us, or else we'll die. And God never speaks to the masses of people again, ever in the Bible. To me, it's that moment that prophecy is born in the story. The prophet meaning a human mediator who stands halfway between the humans and God, and gets the message from God and delivers it to the humans. And that changes everything, because a message by an intermediary is not the same as the original. It would be very nice if I came into you today and said, this is amazing. Over the weekend, I met the President of the United States, and he told me this, this, and this, and he said to send you good wishes, and he told me to tell you this stuff. And you go, oh, isn't that nice, the President? That wouldn't be as good as if the door opened and the guy walked in here right now and he told you himself. And that's just a human. So we're talking God, and that a prophet's job is to convey the Word of God. And that means it's the Word of God, but conveyed through a human personality. So when you see that the prophets are all different, some are rich and some are poor, some are priests, some are laypersons. They do all different kinds of things. And who wrote the Bible? I said Amos was a cowboy. I was later told that was a silly thing to say, that Amos was not a cowboy. A cowboy is someone who herds cattle while riding a horse. That's the definition, and I checked it, it's true. That's the definition of a cowboy. They didn't do it on horseback, therefore Amos was not a cowboy, he was a cowherd. I have not changed that in subsequent editions of the book because I'm trying to be cute, but he's not a cowboy, he's a cowherd. He's a rancher, you know. And, but the point is they have all different kinds of backgrounds. Some of them are good speakers, some are not. Some are influential and have a lot of friends. Some are hated in town. So it is the Word of God mediated through a human personality. So, for example, when Isaiah says, they'll beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, nation won't lift a sword against nation, then we won't learn war anymore. And then Micah, in the same period, two guys were alive in the same time. Micah says the exact same words, but it's not the same if it's two different guys saying it. You know? If it were performed for you, that speech, it'd be very different if you heard Daniel Day-Lewis deliver those words or Chris Rock. It would be the exact same words, but it wouldn't be the same because that human's personality would impact on that. And when you hear like stories of, every now and then you hear a Hollywood story of when there's some movie you like or don't like, and they say, it actually wasn't supposed to be this actor or actress in the movie. It was supposed to be so-and-so, but then there was a contract dispute or something, and they had a breakdown or something, so they changed it. And then you go, oh no, the movie would have been much better that way. The movie would have been much worse the other way. You know, Casablanca was not supposed to be Bogart. It was supposed to be Ronald Reagan. That would have been a different movie, you know. And we'll always have Paris. I mean, just not the same, you know. And, okay, after this class, you're all to leave here immediately and go see Casablanca. You're not going to go through life without seeing Casablanca, okay? So the different personality impacts on that. And that affects your reading of those books of the Bible. When you read Jeremiah, who are you supposed to picture? You know, and especially Jeremiah I picked because Jeremiah, you know, is the most depressed prophet. If you're ever, I mean, don't read Jeremiah when you're already in kind of a down mood. On the one hand, you'll be able to relate, but this was a man who just, nobody listened to him. Everybody, I mean, they tried to kill him. They imprisoned him. He just lived this horrible life. And even more than Moses, he complains of it and wishes he were dead. And I'll read you the most remarkable passage. Remember, Moses on a couple of occasions says to God, you know, kill me, it'd be better than this. And Elijah on Mount Horeb says to God the same thing, look, just take my life, it's enough. As it happens, that'll come up in the book of Jonah. I just opened to the page. I hate when that happens, but I did. In Jeremiah 20, starting at verse 14, he's going on about just the misery of his condition. And now here it is, and listen really carefully to what he says, because he even tops Moses, Elijah, and Jonah, the three prophets who had said it'd be better to be dead than to be a prophet. And he says, curse the day in which I was born. The day that my mother gave birth to me, let it not be blessed. Cursed the man who brought the good news to my father, saying, a male child is born to you, making him very happy. And let that man be like the cities that Yahweh overthrew, Sodom and Gomorrah, and not relent. And let him hear crying in the morning and wailing in the afternoon, because he didn't kill me from the womb. And my mother would be my grave, and her womb an everlasting pregnancy. Why did I come out of the womb to see suffering and pain, and my days consumed in humiliation? Whoa. So next time somebody says, would you like to be a prophet and have God talk to you? You go, well, could I have a day to think about that? By the way, that is the only clear, unquestionable reference to abortion in the Hebrew Bible. I mean, there are various passages people argue do or don't relate to abortion, but here, I mean, there's no question. He says, curse this man because he didn't kill me from the womb, and I would have remained inside my mother as an everlasting pregnancy. And I mean, it is what it is. And I would never use this in an argument without anybody pro or anti-abortion. I mean, this is a man in pain, and he's saying he's not only wishing that he were dead or killed like Moses, he's wishing he had been aborted in the womb and never seen this world. And that's such an extraordinarily powerful thing, but it's a man in pain. You don't from that make a judgment, therefore Jeremiah is pro or anti-abortion. I mean, it's not. It's like when Moses asked to be killed, he's not pro or anti-death, you know. But it gives you a profound sense of the agony of being a prophet. So, the prophet as this intermediary between the human community and God becomes somebody, it's a man without a country. Occasionally a woman without a country. As it happens, all 15 books of the prophets are male prophets. But we ran into Huldah and Miriam and a couple of female prophetesses, but the main books are all male. But they're intermediaries, so they're a man without a country. And when they talk to God, they represent humans. When they talk to humans, they represent God, and it's the loneliest job in the world. And then there's this question of why it's so hard. And that becomes a big issue in the prophetic books, the difference between the true and the false prophet. Everything Jeremiah says, people say, no, it's not true, you're a prophet of lies. There's one case, this other prophet, Hananiah, says the opposite of Jeremiah. So Jeremiah's saying all these terrible things are going to happen. And Hananiah says, that's nonsense, don't listen to Jeremiah, God talked to me, I'm a prophet, and I'm telling you everything's going to be okay. And Jeremiah says, you're going to die. A short time later, he dies. And they go, did that change anything? No. And he doesn't do it by miracles or tricks. The interesting thing is, in the Moses generation, there's all kinds of miracle stories. We get that. But if you look in all 15 books of the prophets, none of them do miracles, except there's one case in Isaiah where he says to King Hezekiah this thing about the shadow on the steps will go, like the sun will reverse its movement so that the shadow will go that way when it had been going that way. But that doesn't exactly count. That's placed in the middle of the book of Isaiah, but it's the exact words of the story of that happening in the book of Kings. There was a story about Isaiah doing that in the book of Kings. So, it's the exception that proves the rule. And all the stuff that's just the book of Isaiah itself and not taken from another book of the Bible, he doesn't do that. None of the prophets do miracles. There are hardly any miracles in the book of the prophets. You could say that there's the book of Jonah, which is a very unusual prophetic book, but that one is more a story than any of the other 14. And in that one, the prophet himself doesn't do any miracles. It's the fish, the storm. Those who know that book, it's all, There's a guy who gets supposed to deliver a message to Nineveh, right? Remember, Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrian Empire. So he's in Israel. It says he's in Jaffa, which is the site of present-day Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv, Jaffa are like one united city now. And so he goes to Jaffa and gets a boat going to Tarshish, which we usually think is Gibraltar or somewhere across the Mediterranean Sea. Now, I've drawn a map up here enough that you know that if you're being sent to Assyria, it's that way, and Spain is that way. So he's deliberately not taking the message, which you can understand. You've got a picture, it's like God saying to a present-day Israeli, listen, I want you to go to the streets of Baghdad and preach a sermon saying God talked to you and told them that they're bad and they're going to suffer. I mean, first, he'd hop the first ship for Spain. Yeah. So Jonah's trying to get away from being a prophet and delivering this message. And but there's a storm, and they draw lots, and it falls on him, which is like a big surprise. And the sailors throw him in the water, and a giant fish comes and swallows him. And he does what any of you would have done in the situation if you're swallowed inside a giant fish. He composes poetry. And he does this poem to God of praise, and then the fish vomits him on the shore. So now he goes to Nineveh, and he gives this preaching that Nineveh is going to be overturned, and it doesn't happen. And then he's mad at God, and he said, "You see, I knew you were going to do this. You're so merciful. You always let them off, and that's why I didn't want to go." And you're going, "That isn't why you were afraid. Get out of here." And it's this amazing story. So you could say that the storm at sea and the fish are miraculous, but nobody sees that. The guys in the ship just see that there's a storm, and when they throw him over, it stops, but they can't be sure what that means. And he, inside the fish, he knows, but nobody knows but him. So these books are just not about miracles. You don't prove that you're a true prophet by turning, a book into a woman. Yeah.
How do we understand in the prophets reports of God's activity, like Isaiah 37, the 185,000 dead Assyrians, and like things like that?
Well, you see, there aren't that many like that. The passage you give as an example, Isaiah 37, is part of that section. It's from the book of Kings, and some editor lifted it and put it in the middle of Isaiah. So your question would be more like, how does the book of Kings know about anything? The authors of Kings and Samuel, how do they know about anything that happened? The prophets themselves are mostly just talking about stuff that they're seeing with their own eyes. So that section of Isaiah doesn't even pretend to be written by Isaiah. It's being written by the Deuteronomistic historian, the one who or his source in the book of Kings. They mostly are, talking about what they see in front of them and their messages to people, which basically people usually ignore. And it's a very tough burden to be a prophet. So how do you tell the true prophet from the false prophet? If they don't do it by pulling out magic tricks, right? That's not how they do it, right? And they don't do it by having a record of having prophecies come out a lot, because we know that Jeremiah had this terrific record of his prophecies coming true, and they still all called him prophet of lies, people in his own lifetime. So getting it right 10 times before doesn't mean a thing the 11th time. So how do they recognize the true prophet? How do they pick these 15 that make it into the book, and the book of Hananiah and the book of Shmolowitz and all those other books that didn't make it into the book? I think it's the poetry. It's the quality of the poetry. You say, what? Wait a minute, how does that work? The prophets do a kind of poetry that's different from the poetry you would find in the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms or the book of Ecclesiastes, the book of Lamentations are books of poetry in the Bible, Song of Songs, several of these, Proverbs. And those books, the poetry is very regular, not like perfect, like iambic pentameter, like Shakespeare, where every line of Shakespeare has either 10 or 11 syllables and order, and it's different, but it's pretty regular. It looks like poetry that was composed by somebody sitting at a desk with a stylus and a parchment and writing it out and thinking about it and getting it right. The prophets do not read like that. They're much less regular poetry. They look like the kind of poetry that you make up on the spot. If there's anything that I would say is the closest to it in present, in our culture, I would say rappers, but only like the really, really, really best ones, who have not been born yet. And I'm sorry, I consider rap music an oxymoron. I'm sorry, but some rappers are making it up as they go and can occasionally come up with some really clever stuff. Or Robin Williams of blessed memory, who died during this course, I once saw him on television talking with Dick Cavett, and they decided to both talk in Shakespearean English. And Robin Williams was like, going. I mean, this guy's mind could do that. And he's like talking in iambic pentameter and throwing in rhymed couplets and every now and then making a terrific pun and being clever. And you could see he was just doing it on the spot. His mind could do that. Most of us can't do that. But the poets did this kind of poetry that you do on the spot. And that's not something you do automatically. You learn how to do it. So, number one, it's poetry that is composed orally, meaning you're thinking of it in your mind and saying it. You're not planning it the night before and writing it out carefully. And the way you do that is you learn a lot of formulas. We Americans have a trouble with any plural that doesn't end in S. You know, it's really alumni, alumnus, you know. I'm an alumni of UGA. Don't ever do that one. I'm an alumni. Don't do that. It's an alumnus, right? I told them about the Roman orders, the drink. Yeah, we did that. We don't have to tell the same joke again. Okay. You have formulae, and the way it works, people have always observed the most common aspect of biblical Hebrew poetry is parallel. You say something in one line, and then you have a second line that relates to the first line in some way and reinforces it. It might be by saying the same thing in different words. He went unto the mountain, yea, he walked unto the hill. That's not about two guys who made two different trips. That's one, right? Or he went, you can, antonymous parallel. He went unto the mountain, yea, he didn't skip to the valley. You know, and you do, but whatever you do, you've got the first line and the second line reinforces it. And that's really good, because if you get really good at that, while you're saying the first line, you're composing the second one in your head. And it starts rolling out automatically. And then you take a certain number of these and you memorize them. Maybe at first you learn 20. If you've been doing it as a prophet like for 20 years, you may have hundreds of them, of these formulae that you can throw in wherever. People say Homer is composed that way as well, because often if you've read Iliad or the Odyssey, you know, sometimes you'll see a whole paragraph that's almost word for word the same as another whole paragraph somewhere else in there. That means he had it as a formula in his head and he could stick it in where he needed it. And so let's say you've got a few of these. Should we do some? The Lord is mighty in all his ways and gracious in all his works. Everybody got that one? That's parallel. The Lord is mighty in all his ways, gracious in all his works. God is good, God is great, yea, God. The Lord is merciful, yea, but he is also just. Okay, now you're Isaiah. You've got those. You got those. And the people come to you and they say, speak to us of football. And he says, UGA will prevail, yea, the dogs shall succeed. For God stands by them, and God loves Georgia. And God is great in all is mighty in all his ways and gracious in all his works. So let us be thankful and cheer on our mighty dogs. Let Conley catch 3, let Bennett catch 6, yea. For God is good, God is great, yea, God. Sometimes we shall lose, and other times we shall win, because the Lord is just, but he is also merciful, etc. Now, that wasn't great. It wasn't horrible. But Isaiah did, they'll beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And after you have enough, and we know that that was a formula he had in his back pocket, right? Because Micah used the same one. So one or the other thought of it, or else they both got it from somewhere else, I don't know. And that Joel could take it and flip it around and use it as a reverse. So that after a while you get so good at this that you watch it just flow out. I mean, I say rap. You want a better example? Martin Luther King, who's probably the best at it in my lifetime. And obviously the famous I Have a Dream speech, where he uses the recurring line and then a pattern in between, and then comes back to the recurring line, so that after all you see it coming, but it was just flowing out of him. You could tell that that was not all written out and memorized. It may have been part of it, but some of it, he was on a roll, he was on a roll and it was coming out. And when you can step out in the street and be on a roll like the biblical prophets were, you could imagine that people hearing you say that would say, whoa, where did that come from? And you'd say it about yourself too. Did that come out of me? No, there must be a God. Nietzsche made the claim that all belief in gods derives from that, especially from musicians. And if any of you play an instrument, any instrument, you know the experience sometimes where one day you're just better than you were before. Like guitar, you just start going and it just works. In sports, they're called playing in the zone. In tennis, where there's just one, sometimes you see this like it's in the finals at Wimbledon or something, and one guy or woman just tears the other one up, even though the day before you would have said these are about equal. But you have one of those moments where you can't go wrong. And when a musician does it, or a poet does it, you go like, where did that come from? Not from me, from God. I saw Groucho Marx do it. He was sitting talking, and all these incredibly brilliant things were coming out of him when he was just on a talk show. And at one point, he just stops and he goes, like, where the heck did that come from? I didn't do that. And that could have been what, really, people seeing the prophets doing this would say, okay, I give. That's God. And that may be how they knew the true prophet from the false. Or I could be completely wrong.